For this next session of the sixth Widening the Pipeline virtual training, we all know that editors and managers in media organizations play a significant role in how information is transmitted to the public. But America's so-called racial reckoning has highlighted the need for more diversity in newsrooms as historically challenging and divisive issues are explored. At the Washington Post, Deputy Political Editor Brianna Tucker joined the team to focus on the younger demographic of voters and how their key concerns and issues can sometimes be glossed over or misinterpreted. So Brianna joins us today to share her own career journey and insights that she's learned from them. And then she can discuss also one of the Post's key recent projects, and it's called the Build a Democracy Toolkit. So Brianna, welcome to the Widening the Pipeline Fellowship Program.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces, some NABJ faces, ONA, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys about what the Post has been working up to, a little bit about myself and my journey to this role, what it means to be, an editor, but also covering elections and politics for this audience at such a critical time in our democracy, and answer all your questions today.
Wonderful. Well, if I recall from our prep conversation, you didn't start out wanting to be a political journalist. Is that correct?
No, I didn't. I didn't. I always knew that journalism was a talent of mine. I was really, someone who chose all throughout school to do written projects and essays and explain things with my words, with photos, with images. But I initially thought I wanted to be a music journalist. I wanted to cover music. I was also a really great clarinetist at the time. As I told you earlier, I wanted to take Matt Taibbi's job from the Rolling Stones. That was a goal of mine. So it was an interesting role, but I did grow up with parents who were also very much embedded in politics and a military father and, two great people who just always had me watching the news, and every Saturday news was on. And so it wasn't until after graduating college, actually, I got my first job at the Chronicle of Higher Education. And, a lot of people could probably relate, but, in journalism, it's a tough market. So I took a role that was not particularly the topic that I wanted to cover, but it was at an institution that was credible and would at least help me launch into this job market, especially in DC. And so I was covering a story for Hurricane Maria, and it was 2017, I believe. And in the midst of covering that, I got really interested in just the federal response, what policies were going to be happening, how the Department of Education was going to be helping students from Puerto Rico, from USVI, from all of these regions reacclimate into the US, into the mainland. And through that, I was also noticing there was a lot of misinformation, disinformation around citizenship, around, Puerto Rican Americans and within my newsroom even. And so it was really eye-opening for me to see where I could go to cover policy. And I was interested particularly in race and politics. And so it was a great experience, I think, to launch me to other things. And I just kept rolling with that. And I moved on to help Tiffany Cross when we launched the Beat DC and did a newsletter that was specifically only minorities in Congress. And so that was a very intensive crash run on just, every person in Congress at a national level and covering politics at a national level. And I continued to add to the toolbox. I worked for a nonpartisan think tank, and I got some experience working with polling, public opinion methodology. I also worked as an editor doing an advocacy group, like kind of just seeing what the advocacy and kind of organizing and grassroots landscape also looks like in this time. And I was able to get a job at the Post, going back to newsletters and doing that kind of high level, complex, really, newsy output for someone who was consuming this, your government leaders, your federal workers, people on the Hill. And when we started this initiative, The Next Generation, and that became available to me, I knew that I wanted to come back to not just my own identity as a millennial, but a younger community where I'm helping people understand their politics and I'm reaching them where they are and I'm shaping our stories in ways that they understand them, but they're also helpful and they're also engaging.
Tell us about the structure of the political team at the Post. I was not aware that there are several deputy political editors, but give us a little insight into how it is structured.
Yes, so the politics team, there are several deputy politics editors. So for me, my role is with The Next Generation. I work with a team of reporters and a social video producer. And we are focused particularly on this audience of 18 to 45, which the Post has a audience that skews much older. So most of our coverage is geared for that 45 and up kind of page, people who are already subscribed. But this is an initiative to across the newsroom, really, but it's starting in the politics team. So we've got a great launch pad to show them what we can do. And there are still other positions with us. So some of you may know Vanessa Williams. She's our other editor. She works particularly on voters. We have another deputy politics editor who's also on campaigns. We also have someone who focuses on democracy. And we also have other editors, but they are particularly titled as like Congress editor, White House editor. And so those are kind of so that we can be a little bit more specific about our niche audiences. And then of course, for my role is broadly all politics, all things, but how can we shape this in a visual format? How can we take these stories and tell them in a way that is off the site, off platform, things like Instagram Reels, or if we're doing Twitter Spaces, or if we're talking about something or answering questions via TikTok, we're debunking a claim maybe. Those are the kind of formats that we look at as well, in addition to our on-site stories.
So the theme of our discussion today is preserving our democracy. What is the journalist's responsibility? And so I mentioned to you the other day that one of the key challenges that we've talked about over the past few months of widening the pipeline is this issue of lived experience and how sometimes it can be challenged in the newsroom setting as to whether or not we are qualified to be on a certain team or whether we're too close to a specific issue because of our background, our heritage, our identity. And so I ask you to maybe think about what this has meant during the course of your career. Can you share some insights for us about times when it's made a difference that you had a seat at the table, or that you were in the newsroom, or when your expertise was challenged?
Absolutely. I can start with even a more recent example. Coming into the Post at this job, at this role, I started at the Post as a deputy editor on the newsletters team. I was 26 years old. I believe I was the youngest deputy editor at the Post on the politics team, and maybe a couple other departments. But one particular example is a story I had pitched earlier this year before I transitioned to this role, which was on this viral account on Instagram. I'm sure a lot of you heard of it, Dear White Staffers, that basically chronicled just the work-life culture, if you might say. Some would say very toxic as well, of Capitol Hill staffers who are more junior, your legislative assistants, your LC, or not LCs, your staff assistants, your schedulers. And so I had pitched this story, and it was something that nobody knew was going on. But I had been following this account for a while. I was pretty, well-versed on all social platforms. And the claims and things that we were starting to see started escalating to a point where I said, okay, we've got to actually talk about this. This is, not just a forum for getting your complaints off. These are things that multiple people seem to be corroborating and we should look at. And so pitching that story, I think that, everyone was surprised that, this was a source for a story, number one, but also how could we go about finding out more information about this, finding more information about some of the claims against members of Congress, finding out, what the unionization efforts were starting to look like. And in that effort, I think that it was a great story, one, for just its performance. It absolutely blew up, it absolutely encouraged other outlets to also start, corroborating and seeing what kind of reporting we already had and what else needed to be plugged in. And I think that it wouldn't have happened if I didn't bring that up. No one had been following it, but also I don't think that anybody who maybe wasn't in the room felt comfortable bringing it to an editor. So that was an access point that I realized that I have, and I should absolutely use my voice to talk about it. And even in that, I still made sure that the people who are assigned to it were also comfortable. And it turned out to be a great assignment for one of our younger, more junior staffers. She ended up building a lot more trust to actually break news from that story about the unionization efforts, and has been integral to the work that we've been doing since. And so I'm really proud of how it shaped up to be. Should I give another example?
Keep them coming.
I remember even earlier where there were times at the Beat DC where, I'm the young, 22 or 23-year-old at the time. And I'm, trying to tell my editor that they don't use these words. Like, this is not, the hip thing to say. If you go on TV and say this, everyone will laugh. You also have to be kind of like tuned in, but, it can be scary, of course, too, because, you don't want to say the wrong thing, and you definitely defer to, your boss or organization at the time. But just understanding that you have a unique experience, you have a perspective that other people don't have. There's a reason that you're in this role. It's because you're bringing something that they can't see, the blind spot, the new, up and coming trends, things that they should be watching that maybe they're not plugged into. And so that's a perfect example of one. And then also there was a time as well at the Chronicle that I remember thinking through how we were going about language within the newsroom. And it had to do with a lot more senior editors, and, we're at the town hall and we're talking about, things coming up in the organization. And I remember at the time I had asked a question because one of the organization's leaders had said something around, not using the word diversity. And that was a problem to me because within the organization and also our writing, we also use the word diversity, right? I'm covering colleges. I talk about the vice president of diversity and inclusion on campus. But to not use that word is a much bigger issue from you, as a leader in this organization. So I had questioned that. And this is my first job, which is like, a lot to take on. But I had questioned that because I knew that that wasn't right. And I knew that was a problem for us to not use the same vigor and language that we use in our stories, but, to change that internally. And so that was definitely a more, probably the first instance of me kind of going against the grain, but also understanding, what's right is right. And that needed to be, addressed so that we could actually keep ourselves accountable in our organization.
Have you ever been in a position where your identity as an African-American woman was challenged or questioned in terms of whether or not you could be objective in a particular issue?
I think I have, and I think those moments, I wish they stood out more to me and I could point out a specific time, but I feel like every single time I've had an instance of that, I've been able to still use it to my advantage. I think more recently, when we talk about Stacey Abrams and the coverage that we're looking at right now and kind of, how Black women are voting in elections and, them as the bloc that constantly shows up, is voting Democratic every time, has put, propelled Biden to office, Obama to office, all these candidates to office. And it's speaking from experience that I know everybody doesn't have. And that's the point where there aren't, a lot of Black women who are editors and are able to say these things and have credence to them because they've lived them. And that's not saying that every Black woman is monolithic at all, but it's also very, very cognizant of, what we as a collective and just diaspora seem to understand or seem to be how we process different events and news and things like that. And so I absolutely think, it's been to my advantage to be a Black woman and say that I'm, very proud Black woman. And this is how I can help shape this story, or that, to say something that is maybe the quiet thing, but to say the quiet thing out loud and say, that's not, what we need to be covering, or maybe that's not, how people are actually processing this information.
I know you can't get into the specifics of coverage and what you may be planning around the midterms, but let's talk a bit about your vision or your hope for what messages or what stories can be conveyed about the racial reckoning, about what's going on, voting rights, voting access. What do you hope to be able to contribute to that?
Wow. Man, I mean, I think when it comes to our coverage, especially with the way that we're at least processing how these polls are, changing day to day, the reporters that we have on the campaign trail and the information that's getting back to us, I feel like it's integral for us to really have a broad scope and also not to be extremely closed-minded about how these elections and midterm results can go. One thing I think we've been really careful about, especially when it's with misinformation, is how we cover misinformation and having a strategic plan set up to basically have, these things are debunked, these things as they happen, and also not amplifying those claims before they happen. So, I can give one example. We were talking about a certain story, and there was a question about whether or not we should be, seeing, what do people feel like? Do they feel like, the misinformation or their vote is fraudulent or something? And we really have to be careful about a story like that because it hasn't happened yet and we don't have any proof. And so we'd be speculating on the what if, and it also kind of pushes this fear mongering between, an election system that it's all rigged and that's not, true. So that's one aspect I think we've been careful with. For this racial reckoning as well, I think broadly internally too, I think we have a lot of conversations, and I'm grateful for the team that I'm on. We have these conversations as far as what Black voters are doing. We're talking about Latino voters. We're talking about women voters, LGBTQ voters, how these issues are actually reverberating, not just to the DC media bubble, but people everywhere in every, corner that we can find and talk to and who will talk to us. And I think that once again, coming down to who we can talk to and who we can really just, I'm sorry, could you say that one more time? I feel like I'm rambling.
No, I just feel that, again, your identity, your presence, your lived experience, your focus, particularly now with the midterms when there's so much, it appears to be so much at stake. And I want to now maybe pivot to the youth aspect of it, because sometimes I feel, and particularly people in my own age demographic, we can be sort of dismissive of TikTok messages or whatever other sort of creative ways are being developed to try to engage young people. How much is the Post doing in that regard, and what do you feel your responsibility is in contributing to that?
Yes. So the Post is doing a lot of things. It's not just, the Next Gen Politics team that's doing that. We also have a ton of ideas that come out of our social teams, that come from our internal engineering teams of how they want to do a certain design, how something should be reworded language. Our homepage platform, multi-platform editors are also cognizant of these initiatives and how we want to make sure we present information on our app versus on the site. And so those are just a couple of things that we do. But my goal for that too is understanding that young people are non-monolithic, of course. They don't just care about climate change and student loans. And it's not necessarily that you did a story and now you reposted that story on TikTok or you posted the link to it on Twitter. It's also how you covered the story. It's about how, what voices you included in the story. It's about, the impact, who was impacted. Did you say, who's going to feel it the most? Did you cover it in a way where, you thought about, would somebody share this story because I think it's newsy, or would they share it because this is going to affect them or someone that is a loved one of them? How can I make it more relatable? An example of that is, we thought about in our stories in certain counties where voting really makes a difference, where it's a matter of 500 people showing up and it can go left or right. And breaking that down into that's as small as, your ninth grade high school class, like your local high school class, or something where it's like, oh, wow, like that's just me, in 11th grade, 12th grade, like that could be the difference between me voting, or that could be, my general college semester class. Like this is the type of stuff where it breaks down. Also thinking about the platforms that we are on and how we cover these stories. What are their purposes, right? So if we're doing something and we have a visual aspect to it, does it have utility? Is it an explainer? Can we answer these questions that are, reverberating on certain platforms or internet, claims? Can we debunk something? TikTok, as much as people love it for hacks and dance challenges and whatever else you can entertain yourself with, it is also a bastion of misinformation on that app. And so when I go there and I ask our reporters to just go look at, this hashtag or see something, and to see what the conversation is already, what, claims are out there, what kind of misinformation is out there, because everybody's not a journalist. Everybody does not have the same, ethical standards or reporting credibility that they're bringing to the table, but they might be having a comment or something, and those things spread like wildfire. And what we know about this generation is they care about bias. They do care about where they get their information from, but we also care about making sure that when we're covering politics, it has to not only reflect them, it needs to also sound like it needs to be for them, right? We can't just have our coverage, be a high level or something complex. Everybody doesn't know what it means to have something enshrined in the Constitution. And that's something that can skew somebody from continuing to read a story or not, because they feel like, wow, this story is just not for me, or this kind of coverage, it doesn't resonate with me. I think I'll go read something else. I also think that, when we do write and we do think about, our subscribers and our audiences, to think ahead of who we're thinking of, like really picture, this profile, this person of who we're thinking of, someone who's not subscribed to us. Maybe, they know there's an election happening, but maybe they don't read us at all. Maybe they don't read any politics at all. So what are the entry points that we want to think through of, if somebody comes to this today, they have a way of understanding it and reading it, and we've got their visual attention. They've learned something, they've walked away with it. They've shared it. If they're not going to be an immediate subscriber, that's okay, but we are still trying to attract this audience and then retain them and then keep engaging with them. A perfect example of this is earlier this year, I was on away for a fellowship earlier, and a story had come out about how young Americans are watching, or how America is watching the January 6th hearings. And I came back and read the story just to see, how it was covered, what was happening. And I noticed the youngest person that was quoted in that story at the time was like 53 years old. And I said, like, to, my staff meeting that morning, I said, I read the story last week, and that's not America. Like, we can't just have these people. And there's people in the story where you're like, she's with her, 20-year-old son. And I'm like, why didn't we ask the son what he was thinking? Like, that's something where the reporters in the room asked them both. And so, that's the kind of blind spot that, is an honest mistake, but it's also a huge oversight in our reporting. And that's where young people, of course, we can spot those things, because we know those things, because I knew that I didn't see myself in that story. So yes. And it was also a moment to say, okay, young people are watching the January 6th hearings, but maybe not in the conventional ways that you're thinking of, right? Maybe it's not just sitting in front of, C-SPAN, like a lot of people do to watch this. Maybe they saw a viral clip of it and they're watching it, retweeting it on TikTok. Maybe they saw, another, segment of Josh Hawley running down the hall. Like, that's something my sister sent me. And I'm like, oh, she knows about this. It's just not in the conventional way that people are used to. And so tapping into those moments and also realizing where we have an opportunity to engage with someone is one of my goals for this team.
This is incredibly powerful. I'm so happy to hear this. Do any of the fellows have any questions at this point? Or can we, I don't see any Zoom hands. Oh, Torrance, please introduce yourself and jump in.
Hi, I'm Torrance. at the Miami Herald. Well, actually, it's a two-part. I feel like you're fairly young in a very big role, and I think that's amazing. But I do want to ask you, have you ever dealt with imposter syndrome along your journey up to now? And if so, how did you navigate that? Then part two, can you tell us about the art of betting on yourself and how that's played a role in the decisions that you've made in your career?
Sure. Oh gosh, imposter syndrome. So yes, I think if I didn't have imposter syndrome, that would make me a cocky, and I'd not be able to see my own flaws. I wouldn't be able to actually audit myself on where I know I need help. It wouldn't make me honest. It wouldn't keep me honest with myself about, I don't know everything. I'm not going to, nobody does, but at least I know the gaps and where I need to improve. I know my strengths and weaknesses and who I need to, work with, what I need to identify to get better. When it came to dealing with that, I think part of it is focusing on the good too, like focusing on, okay, like I'm in this position because I'm qualified to be here. Like they see my talent. It's obvious. And it's not just me. It's, these people with twice my years experience, maybe twice my age, and have so much experience. And yet they see the potential. They see what I'm capable of doing, but also I got to see it in myself to be able to do my best work. I know that I bring something to the table that nobody else has, knowing you have a great lived experience. You've been here, you've been there, you've had success, you've had failure, you've had these lessons that nobody else has. And there's a reason why you're in this position, right? But also thinking about the people that you can serve with the position that you have. I think everybody gets into journalism because to some degree, we want to help people, right? Like we want to make sure that the audiences that we are telling the news for and talking to have some information they walk with, that they know a little bit more about their day and how they're going to go about their day and make decisions in life, right? In the world around them. And so, some days it's hard. Some days I'm like, I don't know if I want to cry or boss up, but I have to just boss up. But other days, they're really, really great where I have wins and I'm like, it's incredible. It's not lost on me that, I'm grateful, very grateful, very blessed to have moved so fast in my career. And I know the work it took to get here, it took a lot, but every step and every day, I think through, I still have something to prove. I still, I'm not done. I'm not where I want to be. Like, I'm not, complacent, but also I have so much to learn, so much to work for, and to just keep going. And then the really betting on yourself as well. I think you know yourself better than anybody else does. I think it's important for you to also identify the relationships that are going to help mold you into a better journalist, a better reporter, a better editor, a better listener. And also be judicious about the certain advice that you do take. I think, everybody will want to chip in and weigh in and tell you how to be this and how to be that and do this and that. But the best, the advice I've gotten is to be yourself. There's only one you, and, it's a lot harder trying to emulate somebody else than to be yourself and to bring your authentic self to work. And in the end, that is your goal. That is what, is going to make you a sharper writer, a sharper editor, a more relatable interviewer, a great colleague, someone that people can trust, and people see that. And so definitely, sit with your truth, but stay confident in yourself and stay confident in your abilities. And we need journalists. We need, more young journalists and people who want to be covering, the topics that aren't super, sexy or super, complex or something. Like, we have to do this service for this next generation of readers and subscribers.
Great answer. Any other questions at this point? So one of the reasons I wanted you to join us and talk about the Build a Democracy Toolkit is because I think journalists need to think beyond their specific role, which might be as a writer, which might be as an editor, which might be as a photographer, et cetera, the multimedia aspect of it, or the three-dimensional aspect of trying to communicate information is so important. And in everything that we do as journalists, if we can be thinking, would this make a podcast? Or can I get a graphic with this story? Or can I offer something that gives readers or viewers or listeners even more context around this issue is so important. So would you at this point walk us through, well, first tell us about why this project came together and then walk us through it.
Sure. So the Build a Democracy Toolkit was an idea by Rachel Van Dongen. Ironically enough, she used to be my old editor at the Post when I was on newsletters, and now she's the elections director. She is just a maestro when it comes to navigating all these races and all these narratives around campaigns. And so the idea behind this was to revamp the stories that we had produced in the past, but also present them in a new way that was very personable for anybody who came across the Post weeks before the election, but also the days up to it and after the fact. And so it was really an all hands effort. I mean, you know, we had project editors, we had Instagram, we had our social team. I was brought in, of course, on the next gen side. We had design, PR. Everyone has kind of had a chance to chip in. And even if you weren't specifically working on this project, it was important to her to also have your input from just experiences. I remember we had a meeting where everyone was there, from audience engagement, just saying, does this question sound too wordy? Like, is this relatable? Do you feel like, you know, your cousin or your family member, this person would actually say, I don't understand that, or why didn't they explain this? We sat through with a list of stories that we wanted to incorporate very early on, probably like 3 months ago, of just, you know, the topics that we wanted to talk about, whether it be how to talk through misinformation and what is misinformation versus disinformation. What does the Secretary of State actually do? What does this office hold? Different topics that we could cover, so that whether or not you weren't sure where you wanted to start, and this is those entry points that I was talking about when it comes to not just the elections, but also voting, democracy, where you could start to get the information you want. And it's different for everybody depending on what you want to know, right? And so this toolkit that we have is ever growing from stories that reporters are working on now. And it adds to it, you know, how we can basically label across all of our stories that come out of politics that, hey, you know, this little section here, we've got more of these if you have questions. Here are some more resources that we can be helpful to you for. And it's going to be, I think, really integral as we get closer. And that it's really that week, that Monday, that weekend before Election Day, that I think people are going to have more questions about, you know, how to make sure that your ballot actually counts, you know, writing with this ink versus that ink, and, you know, these tactics that are happening that are, you know, they're to disenfranchise voters, but also how to make sure that you have the right information no matter what. And so in that sense, we've been also testing it too, to make sure that, you know, does this information comply and seem like it's something that a young person would want to read, someone who's 22, a first-time voter might want to read, someone who maybe isn't, maybe is 40 or 50 years old, but for some reason, this is the election they feel like they have to come out and vote for. Someone who is embedded in politics all the time. What can we teach them that's new? What can we tell them that they would share with friends and family, so that their colleagues, so that, you know, everyone is getting as much information, but also in a very organized way, a very digestible way. So they're not overwhelmed with, you know, text. There's also images. There's also more to find out and more to expand on if they need it. And so this is a great project where everybody was hands-on. Lots of input was put into this and is still ramping up to this day. It will keep going. So definitely go check it out. It's on the Post Politics page. And yeah.
Can you drop a link maybe into the chat? That'll be one
absolutely.
So if you had, and again, I know you can't share any stories that you're working on right now, but give us some ideas or examples of the kinds of stories that these journalists could do in their communities that are connected to not only the midterms, but to this larger issue of access to information and what it means in a democracy.
Yes. So I think stories, I know I'm thinking of stories that you all can do that we're not too touch base on right now. I think one thing we should also be looking at the issues that are playing out, especially when it comes to abortion. I think we've all seen kind of how that reverberated for Republicans and the messaging behind that, but also how Democrats lately, their campaign has changed and their tune has changed, especially from where voters are sitting with that, and if that's really going to make a difference. I also think that when it comes to young people and also looking at kind of the upcoming, political profiles of candidates. So for example, we did something on Maxwell Frost, and I think this is like a longer future thing that everyone should be thinking about too. But it's kind of your 2024 pockets that are going to be people who are being groomed or maybe working on these campaigns or have been floated names perhaps. And that's a little bit more of the deep sourcing, but also thinking about long-term kind of what these campaigns and what this transition might also look like. I also think in your communities as well, when it comes to voter access and voters and just democracy as well, I also think it's just still worthwhile to keep doing stories on whatever your state voter law is, your runoff is. I think people constantly have questions about, what states are going to have a runoff and what does this mean to get, 51%. And, election law is confusing. And I think everybody has an opportunity to make it as seamless and understandable as possible for people, from just how to make sure that, your ballot is filled out correctly to, where to vote, what early voting places are, where, what live reporting you can do. I think something that was really cool in 2020, at least, was I saw a lot of reporters that would actually go around to polling stations and say what the wait looked like based on where, you were in the county. And I think if election day comes up, that's a big deal for somebody to know, hey, if I could see that this was actually not that crowded over here, or maybe it takes me maybe 30 minutes to vote here versus 2 hours to vote here, that makes a difference of whether or not they might vote or whether or not they can get to the poll that day. I thought that was just a really creative way to, potentially, make a story out of it, but also talk about something happening right then and there. Trying to think of any more examples. I'm happy to talk through if anyone has an idea to kind of add a perspective to them.
I kind of have one thought, and that is, what is the journalist's or media's responsibility to, I don't want to say necessarily disengage voters, but the huge story every year, every election cycle we hear is of the large block of people who simply don't vote, don't think voting's for them, don't think it matters one way or the other. So again, as journalists, we're taught to report what happens and not to be advocates, not to be, out there trying to whatever. So educating folks who are going to vote is one thing, but do journalists have an opportunity or responsibility to sort of ignite those folks who have basically written it off?
Absolutely. And this is another project of ours that will be a long-term up to 2024. We're hoping after this election that we'll be working on. Journalists absolutely have an opportunity to show this large block of voters who don't vote. I think every election year, we kind of get reminded that, millions of people came out to turn out the vote. And then we see the numbers and realize and that's not everybody. That's still maybe 50% a max of people who are actually voting, who can vote, who are eligible to vote. And so why is that? What's going on? I think one thing too, when it comes to talking about that, we talk about barriers as well. We can also talk about enthusiasm. We can also talk about, some people, it's not really a matter of whether or not they want to vote for a candidate. It is whether or not they just want to vote at all. And getting at that question of why that is, getting at that question of what would push them to vote? What would encourage them? Barriers aside, access aside, age aside, even this next swath of people who will be voting, especially for 2020 to 2022, these are your high school, seniors. It's their first time voting, and they're getting out of COVID, and they've dealt with, a total change from their landscape and everything that they knew that was, normal, to now this new normal, and what it means for them to vote. Whether or not these college campuses, are they having early polling stations? Is it accessible for them in the ways that maybe they saw or maybe weren't experienced in 2020? How had that changed for them? And so I think it's absolutely our responsibility to look at that, and also understand, we have to put ourselves in places that we are not necessarily looking at, even if it doesn't, have the right angle, I would say. Or maybe you're thinking, well, why would I go there? It's just, are you just picking a random city on a map? Or it's, have we never been here before? When we look at the county voting records and we look at the breakdown of this party or that party, and also voting eligible population that's here, we need to be going there. We need to be talking to people. We need to be going to your local community, going to your churches, your grocery stores, your schools, your sporting events, wherever you can find people who are willing to talk to you from every demographic, and ask them, what does this mean to you? How is this reverberated in your community from this level, from this congressman to your local election, to your local DA, to the cases that are happening? And I think you can start with that by pinpointing some of these major trials that are unfolding, and looking at kind of the legal system and how that's been impacting people in these states.
I don't have any questions, but just a comment to say thank you, because first off, my name is Gabrielle. I'm a reporter for PolitiFact. So a lot of the things that you're saying, we also deal with here, and especially in terms of social media and reaching people there, TikTok and the like. And so I appreciate this, because this is helping me to look at our audience, especially in the upcoming 4 weeks, not just the older voting block of people, but the younger people as well who are on social media. So this is good.
Thank you. And I want to say TikTok is great. TikTok is not just, hacks and dances. If you're not on TikTok, I encourage you to just get an account and get on there. I know sometimes you might be on what they call the wrong side of TikTok. You can't control it as much as you want to, but it is actually, think of it as a search engine, right? If you want to find out what people are talking about and what they're actually, the conversation is, and to get out of your own kind of media bubble, because we all have it, where Twitter is like shouting in a room of people that only you follow. So it's definitely will introduce you to different perspectives and different actors, maybe bad actors, content creators, whoever it may be, and the people that agree with them in the comments. So that's a great resource. Thank you.
When I just need to laugh hysterically, I go to TikTok. It's just, there's so much foolishness, but sometimes you need that. Laura, your hand was up.
Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't speak up, especially right now. Hi, I'm Laura. I actually also work with Gabby for Pointer, but I'm an editor now for MediaWise. And part of what we do is that I'm an editor for something called the Teen Fact Check. Oh my gosh, my monitor is like going crazy next to me. Sorry. I'm an editor for something called the Teen Fact Checking Network. And our whole thing is just making they're like fact checks and media literacy lessons in one, and it's all on TikTok. And I guess, I don't know if maybe you have any insight, but I'm very fresh at this job. I'm like in my second month here. But a big challenge really is like reaching that younger audience that you're talking about and like really impacting them, because even with us, it's like we have these teenagers who are making these videos for their peers, but then we're still like finding comments from like middle-aged men, right, who are like making fun of them or something. And it's like, this is not for you, like this is for them. But it's like, I don't know, like what have you found to be effective in reaching that high school age and like cutting through the noise?
Right. So I think the interesting thing with that, and especially like that distinguishing like the high school age to like after 18. And I say after 18 because we also need to think in a mindset that everybody, you know, doesn't go to college, right? We need to think through like there are identities of people who go straight to work, who go, you know, who are live with disability for whatever reason, and kind of separating like these are all unique identities of how they're going to process and maybe consume or find information. But, you know, before 18, when you're thinking of that kind of younger, like 12, maybe they just got their phone to maybe they're just about to graduate high school. I found that for this group, talking more about the issues than about all of the candidates is what makes sense. I think for one, it's because they're not able to cast a vote. They're getting ready to, or maybe they're learning about, you know, a particular candidate that might be more local or affect them other than your just presidential coverage. But in between then and there, I think everybody, you know, I couldn't tell you who was running for my state attorney, like, or when I was 15. So that's something when I think talking about the issues itself makes sense, and thinking about as a high school student and in your experiences, this is a generation that has dealt with entirely different things than we did, right? A lot of us, you know, we've got people who are voting for the first time and they don't know where they were at 9/11 because they weren't there. Like they just don't have that perspective. And so thinking about, you know, what I would understand when I think about foreign policy or terrorism, and thinking about where they would learn about foreign policy or terrorism, maybe it's more so through documentaries, and maybe it's more through video of, you know, what this is. And then understanding that, you know, Taliban has been there a very long time. It wasn't here till 9/11. And so I think that's one point. But with TikTok, it's interesting just because the algorithm and the way it works, you are susceptible to putting yourself out there. And reporters are also, you know, when you do post something, there's not really a limit of how many views you can get. You can't just cap it at like, okay, I've got my 50,000 views, I'm done. Let's pull this. It will keep recirculating, and everyone will find it based on people who, you know, want that type of information, and people who decided they don't want that type of information, or they don't like this organization, or they just don't like the person presenting it, and have something to say. So that's kind of where it's a wild card, where, you know, going viral is like, you don't know where it can go, but you have the right intent of being on that platform. I think that for that especially, you know, there's no better place. Thinking strategically, which you probably already know about the hashtags that you're going to be using, the time of day that you're going to be posting it, the visuals and that hook that you're going to have in the front line of the video that's going to grab someone's attention, because you only have about maybe 3 seconds before you start swiping, right? And so I think you're on the right page with that.
This is great. So as we wind up this discussion, Torrance has one more question. Torrance.
I'm sorry. This is so engaging. I love this conversation. Another two-part, Brianna. Walk with me. So the first, what do you feel about this? You know, we've had the reckonings and all of the newsroom revolutions. What do you think of the state of newsroom leadership in 2022, from your perspective? And then secondly, if you can take a step back and look 10, 15 years from now, what would you like your legacy to be, not only at the Post, but just in journalism, period?
That was going to be my last question, Warren. So
we are in alignment, baby. Patty LaBelle.
Watch it. Okay.
The state of newsroom leadership. I mean, I think in many ways, when we saw 2020, I felt like there were a couple months, especially for, you know, a lot of our friends and colleagues and, you know, people in the Black community. It felt like for a couple of weeks, I felt like we could get whatever we wanted at this point, because it's y'all are starting to see what people have been seeing and knowing for years. It was just like a reckoning of, we tried to tell y'all. So now I feel, as, you know, we've seen these shifts, that power shift from the unions that have started, from, you know, just being able to say something and everybody actually say, okay, yeah, instead of, you know, this kind of, you know, within reason, and people listening to the feedback, and people also being unafraid, quite frankly, to show resistance when something is just not working for them, when it's not working, you know, for colleagues. And so I think we've had a lot of challenges, right? Like we've all probably had to work remotely. We've all had to balance a team, join a team, start a job, build relationships over Zoom. And it's taxing. It's really taxing. And so I think for the newsroom leadership, it's been a shift. I can speak at the Post especially, and I've seen them actually be accountable and start elevating people of color, younger people, and really the makeup of who's in these editorial meetings, making these decisions has gotten better. Make no mistake, I've seen it. It's gotten better. And as far as I'm concerned, they are committed to that. And so for other newsrooms, and I can't speak to all of them, but we've had a lot of firsts in the same place. I mean, when I look at Ron Nixon, who's like head of like AP, like the investigation now, that's like amazing. When I think about Sarah Gu at Axios and, the transformation of what Axios started and, what we first saw and, the viral picture. And now like we've seen the staff actually shift to become more diverse as well. And even in the midst of that, smaller newsrooms as well have come up, and we've seen how people are building their own outlets and building the coverage that they want to see when something isn't working for them. And so there's a competition for sure. Make no mistake. But I do think it's been shifting more and more. I think that people are starting to see talent on the rise, and they want to identify these people because they know that, we are in a changing newsroom and a changing media landscape, and they need the eyes and the ears and the experience of someone who doesn't have their background, who doesn't share all of their experiences or views, and can bring something different to the table, because we're all trying to be the best. We're trying to be accurate. We're trying to be fair. And it's a competition. It's constant. On the legacy standpoint, I always think back to this quote by Maya Angelou about success, which is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it. And when I think about that in 15 years, I think about who have I helped, who have I lifted to elevated in rooms when I'm not there, or who can I, help maximize their strengths. They may not be the best at this or that, but also what are they really good at that I know they play to their strength? This is exactly like they will get to this goal. How can I put someone on an opportunity that they, might not be ready for, but I know they can succeed, that I can help them with, that, it will push them, but it will also grow them in ways they can't even imagine. And just the coverage that I'm doing. Would I be proud, to say that over the last X amount of years, I was able to help write this, or, to be a part of this project, or to move this issue? Those are the types of things where you see people who work on these projects and they lead to these investigations that, break out or reveal something or hold somebody up in power accountable that otherwise it wouldn't have happened without you. And so it's long-winded answer, but I think, helping as many people as possible in my community and in the colleagues in the newsroom, young people, people of color, from anything, internships, fellowships, getting more people interested in doing this work and seeing what a privilege it is to be able to do this work.
So Brianna, I wanted to ask you tangentially with that, how do you move through like newsrooms that are very resistant to diversity? Like I'm in one newsroom right now where there's only 3 journalists of color out of a staff of 21 people. We only have one editor of color who isn't very keen on doing this. And despite us having many diversity workshops and intensive learning sessions that I've forced them to do, there's been like no commitment through the staff, whether it's through the editors or through the reporters, except for the 3 journalists of color, to actually move forward with anything. Like to that, is there something that should be done more, or is it seem to be more of like a newsroom that that those 3 journalists of color, including myself, should be moving on from? Because I know for right now, the one journalist of color that's in it, he gave his 2 weeks after being so frustrated with it, and the other guy is in sports. And so I'm like in a bit of a sticky, not in a bit, I am in a sticky situation as to whether to stay here for the long haul and keep trying to, because I've been here for 2 years, or if it's time for me to just move on and just wash my hands of this.
Crystal, before Brianna answers, I'm going to jump in and say this is a conversation and a session that we need to have at an upcoming training. That's just a long and complicated answer is required to that. But Brianna, do you want to say something about this?
Yeah, real quick, I think that these are the type of questions you have to ask yourself. What's it going to cost you to stay and stick around and fight for that change? And whether or not that change is going to be worth it to you. Because at the end of the day, if you are fighting and, tooth and nail every day and no one is listening to you, are you sure that's the newsroom that you want to be in? Don't you have, experiences and talents and ideas that somebody would love to have those types of, people? There are so many other people who want people just like you in their newsroom, bringing this up to them. And so, I'm a big believer on, standing up for what's right, but also I'm very much into self-preservation as well. And if I know that I can thrive somewhere else, go where you're watered, not where you're tolerated. So, there are other places you've given 2 years. You see her snapping, you've given 2 years and you should be proud of that. But also, I think, it's a lot of young people on this call and, they know us, we're a generation. We are very much, we will leave this job, like Beyonce said, and find something else. And it sounds like you have a lot of ideas to offer that other people would be very grateful to share and have you on their team with.
Look, that's all I can say. I mean, first of all, I'm going to get a t-shirt with "Go where you're watered, not where you're tolerated." But Brianna Tucker, what I wanted to share with you is that I interned at the Washington Post in 1984, so before you were alive. But I was there, and the entire perimeter of the newsroom were offices with white males in those offices. Mm-hmm. I did have the privilege of working with Dorothy Butler Gilliam and meeting her and William Raspberry and a few other people. But the point I want to make to you is your presence is such a balm to my soul. And I'm sure it is an inspiration to these journalists on this call. So we want to thank you for doing the work that you do. We want to thank you for joining us today. And we want you to please, you see they're all clapping here. So we want you to please stay open to coming back to talk to us. And if we need to reach out to you during the year, we hope you'll stay open to that.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys. I hope, I can come back and happy to drop some gems and really just, keep doing what you're doing. Your voices, your perspectives are so important. Keep working at it, find those people in the newsroom who can really advocate for you, who can help you soar, who can, spot where your weaknesses are and help you improve them and work at them. They're in your newsrooms. I believe that. So, and if not, like I said, you go where you're watered.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks, Brianna.
Thank you.